so before I start, I just want to mention that this seminar deliberately has, I wanted to have youth and parents in the same room, because this is not all about, telling parents things. It's not all about telling youth things. There's things that I think both, youth and parents need to understand, because you guys are going to be going on this journey together, all right? So if you look at some of the slides are going to seem like they're addressed more to the parents, and some are going to seem like they're more addressed to the kids. Just, kind of have to take that with a grain of salt. So, all right. So, anyways, what we're trying to do here is the title. We're calling this "College is Calling" because what we wanted to do is give a Christian perspective on kind of the college selection and admissions process. And I realize that some of you may be familiar with the American College selection system. Some of you may not be. So hopefully you'll get some useful information about that. But before I start, I want to ask a question. So how many of you parents specifically took what I call the straight path? And the straight path is you knew what you wanted to do, you got into the college of your choice, and you're actually working in the field you were trained in. Raise your hands. Anybody? Oh, okay, quite a few. All right. So the bad news is some of the material here might be a little bit hard for you to understand then, because you are the success story. All right. Now the rest of us, myself included, had a much more tortured path to wherever we got. All right. And so this may be a little easier to understand in that case. All right. All right. So then the purpose of this is, so if you're here because you want to learn the secret spot, how to get into Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, MIT, you're in the wrong place. You may as well go, because it's not going to help you. All right. But what I'm hoping to do here is kind of put college in perspective, from a Christian perspective again. So whether or not you are Christian or not Christian in this room, that is the bias we're going to have here. Most of you in here are Christian parents, and so I wanted to kind of give you that flavor. And so to give you a context of what you're going to be hearing from, and who the heck am I, and who's this young lady sitting here. So my name is Ed O, if you don't know me. I am the relatively new youth pastor here at this church, all right? And to give you an idea about my background, I'm not doing this to brag, but because I think if you understand where my background comes from and my family's background comes from, I think you'll see a lot of your family in this area, and then hopefully there's things that you can relate to and understand what I'm saying, all right? So while I am currently a youth pastor, I'm a part-time person. Actually, I've spent most of my time in the Valley as a tech executive. I've been working in Silicon Valley for over 30 years. I won't tell you how many more over 30 years. Hannah's laughing back there. So I am a second-generation Korean American. That means I was born in this country like a lot of your kids, all right? And I have bachelor's degrees in chemical engineering and chemistry from MIT, and I have master's degrees in chemical engineering and an MBA from Stanford University. All right, so I think a number of you probably have comparable backgrounds. All right, so now you can kind of put yourself in my shoes. All right. My wife, my late wife, actually, she came from Korea. She was born in Korea, and she moved to Australia when she was in middle school. And then she she was a musician, and she did her musical studies in Australia. And then she came to the United States and got her doctorate in musical arts from Eastman School of Music. And so she's, for some of you may also be able to relate to that. And then what we did is we raised, as Christian parents, we raised 2 children in the Palo Alto School District. All right, so now those of you who are Palo Altans probably get this. Both my kids are Gunn High School graduates, so you probably can relate to that, because some of your kids may actually be in Gunn. All right. So just to cut to the end of the chase, so you know where my kids are. My son Alex, he's 27. He's a software engineer in New York City. Did not get there by the straight path. He definitely did some of these. All right. This is my daughter. She's case study number 2. And she is currently a PhD student at University of California, Berkeley. All right. So that's the context. Right. Now, for we're kind of looking at this nice rosy picture. For those of you who are high schoolers or youth, Sean, you want to show the next slide? It probably feels more like this, okay? But hopefully it won't be quite so scary. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. So before we start, I also want to acknowledge, so to make sure that the information that is being presented here was kind of fairly representing both the American-ish Korean side and the Korean-ish Korean side, We had three sisters here who actually did a wonderful job of actually kind of reviewing the material, making very helpful suggestions and comments. Carol Chun, Yunjung Chang, and Sung Choi. And these are women who are experienced, and I think you would consider them successful moms from all perspectives. So if you ever want a good perspective, you can see these three ladies. All right, so before we start, just as a reflection and discussion, I want you to think about this for a minute. So for parents, I want you to focus on looking at these three questions. If you're a student, I want you to think about this last one for yourselves, all right? So parents, think about the top three things that you want for your kids in life, all right? What kind of life do you want for your kids? Think about this. And then what do you think your children want out of life? And for you guys who are the kids, what do you really want out of life? So one of these discussions I would encourage later, after this thing, because the thing's fun, I wonder how much your perceptions of each other's what you want out of life are in tune. Because what I actually find in a lot of cases is what the kids want or think they want at this point, because a lot of times they don't know, and that is completely normal, versus what you parents want for them are like this, okay? And that can be an issue. And so this is a good time to start talking through those, because there has to be some compromise, and I'm hopefully to give you some tips for how you can kind of do that, all right? All right, so I'm going to start by throwing a couple things out here. So first of all, I want to talk about the difference views of success versus what I call the United States and in Korea, all right? And I actually want to emphasize, this was actually a point given to me by one of the moms, is that I want to talk about the United States outside of Silicon Valley. Because in a lot of ways, the views of success in Silicon Valley actually more closely mirror what you would see in Korea. This is kind of an anomaly. But luckily, what I'm also finding here is Asian American parents are starting to adopt more of what I call the outside Silicon Valley view of this, which is a little bit different. And so if we look at this in the US, this is a very individualistic society, if you haven't noticed. All right, it's all about me. And people think about success, pursuing happiness and dreams, what does it mean for me? Whereas in places like Korea, it's more about the family, and a pursuit of prosperity or status or security seems to be a big one, which is less of an issue from US parents outside of Silicon Valley. In the US, people dream about, there are many dream careers. I mean, you almost can't point to a single career that's like, that's what I want to be. I mean, you talk to young people, they have career ambitions all over the place. Whereas in Korea, it seems to be much more skewed. In fact, this was even true back in my time. Doctor, lawyer, engineer, scientist, or professor, okay? In my family, I have three of those, because it was that bad. Nowadays, what I've been told is it's even more heavily skewed. It's really doctor, and everything else is kind of lesser. Now, I don't know how true that is by your experience, but it's something to think about. In the US, there are many routes to that successful dream, all right? And some of them don't even involve college. Whereas in Korea, the root's college. The root is college. And then in the US, what we have here is we have probably 50 to 100 top-ranked schools, including a lot of small liberal arts colleges, STEM schools, art schools, music schools, things like that that are specialty. Whereas in Korea, it's a much narrower pool. All right. And so one of the things I want you to do is just think about how this reflects, because as parents, when we start guiding our children towards college, we're naturally going to gravitate to what we know and what have experienced. That is normal. But the situation is a little different here in the US, and kids, you're gonna be really, really happy in a lot of ways that your parents actually sort of moved through here, all right? So when I start talking about some of these things, I want you youth to understand that your parents are not crazy for pushing so hard on college, because if we were giving this talk in Korea, I'd be sitting there, one of them would be standing here and telling me how to get into Yonsei, Seoul, or one of those places, because that is sort of what it takes. It's a much different society. All right? Okay, next slide. All right, another thing I want you to think about. So why are we trying to get our kids to go to college? Why should you guys go to college? All right? And these are the sort of the things that pop up on everybody's list. So, well, first of all, that college should lead to a good job for my kid, right? That's a pretty important factor. It should actually lead to something that they can be employed in. But keep in mind, jobs change. Jobs change. All right, some of the jobs that exist today did not exist 10 years ago at all. There's things like data scientist, right? A good college should connect my child with the right network of people. Well, what does that mean? What's the right network? All right, it should prepare my child for the future. This one I actually wholly endorse, but what does that mean? That's very nebulous, right? It's very, prepare for the future. What does that mean? And then one that is biblical is it should help my child discover their calling. Okay, what is it that God has called them uniquely to do in their life? All right, this is a Christian perspective. And there may be other reasons. All right, some college beliefs. So I want you to honestly reflect on this attitude, both youth and parents, all right? How much you actually hold to this belief, all right? And I can tell you, when we started this process, I got to admit, even though I knew better in a lot of cases, I got sucked into this, all right? So one college belief is very common. Acceptance to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, or MIT equals a prosperous and stable career. All right. How strongly do you believe that? Okay, because that can drive a lot of actions. Oh, and on the flip side, the failure of my child to get into Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, MIT is going to make their life so much tougher to succeed. How much do we believe that? All right, so I'm here to tell you that this was a study done in a while, and actually you can actually get this book in Korean from Kyobo. It's a book called Where You Go Is Not Who You Will Be, about college admissions. And they did an interesting study where they tried to correlate success as measured by being a Fortune 500 CEO, a winner of a MacArthur Genius Grant, being a US president or a governor from the political side. They looked at Pulitzer Prize winners from the journalistic side. They looked at STEM, premier STEM people to see if there was any correlation at all between the university they attended and the success rate here. And so if this were true, you would expect a higher percentage of these people to be from these universities. Turns out it's not true at all. There's no correlation. All right, so I want you to think about it. The data does not support that going to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, and MIT will increase your chances of being in one of these categories. All right, that's the data. All right, next one. All right, so what does the Bible say about this? Because what we really want to look at is college in the whole context of raising our children, right? So one thing the Bible says is that God created us for a purpose. And so Ephesians 2:10, it basically says, for we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. So one thing as Christian parents we should be remembering is that God created our children for a purpose. All right, he created, there is something out there that he intends for your child to do, many things that he expects for your child to do, that in a lot of cases uniquely something that only your child can do that you were supposed to discover. So our first priority in raising our children should be getting them to return to him, all right, to accept Jesus and be saved, right, because that's the first part. The second priority is to be in a relationship with him. All right, so if you look at John 15:5, it says, I am the vine, you are the branches, whoever abides in me, and I in him, he is it that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. All right, so the idea here is that our children and we ourselves are meant to be in communion with God, knowing what he plans for us, doing his work, but we have to be connected. All right. And so that means firm grounding in his word, prayer life, and a church community. Now you notice college hasn't even come up on the list yet. All right? That's in the third one. All right? Third priority for our life is to seek his will for our life. It is to find our calling. I know Pastor June is always preaching calling, and he's right to be so. And this is where the role of college comes into play. All right? Because college can be a fantastic opportunity for your student, for youth to figure out what it is that God called you to do. All right? And so that means there's a little different focus about what you should be looking for in college. And that focus is what we call fit. Okay? It's not prestige, it's not the US News and World Report ranking, it's fit. All right? And so one thing, oh sorry, go back, Sean. So one thing I want you to think about here very hard, and this is very hard to do in the what I call the heat of the battle. As you're prepping your kids through college, as you're going through those late high school years, there's so much to do, and there's so much hype out there about what you need to do, and there's so much hype about what the other parent is doing that you're not doing, and you can get caught up in this battle, and you need to remember, where is your faith? Your faith should be in God, not in college. College is just a means to an end. All right, thanks, Sean. All right, so remember, the perspective of this is our goal really is not to get them into college. That's not the end goal. The end goal is to raise a godly adult. And so even as you're going through this thing, I've actually known a lot of Asian parents where they want the kids to focus 100% on studying. Oh, don't worry about doing the dishes, I'll do those for you. You don't need to help prepare anything, I'll do that for you. Laundry, I'll take care of that for you. So you just study, just study, just study. Okay? Well, there's a problem. Okay, I'm going to tell you what the problem is. So first of all, we need to train them in life skills, not just how to do school. And that training needs to start in middle school. Okay? With increasing responsibility. And the reason for that, they need to know how to cook and do laundry and budget their money and manage their time, and they have to be able to do it at the same time they're managing school. All right, because I can tell you, I know several kids who have gone to these prestigious, their dream school. All right, everybody knows. So how many of you have friends or have that their kids have gotten into they've gotten into one of these top schools? Yeah, everybody knows somebody, right? All right, now how many of you know how many of them came back before they graduated? They came back. This is called nobody talks about this, all right? So these are the kids that typically come back in their sophomore or junior year, and they're burnt out, and they're failing, and they have psychological issues not because of the academics, it's because they couldn't do this part. They couldn't do the living part and do the academics because mom and dad weren't there anymore to do that. Mom's not there to cook for them. Dad's not there to clean the apartment or take care of the car. All right, and now they got to manage all of this plus all the academic pressure. They come home. You don't hear about those stories because nobody talks about that. They'll tell you very quickly, my kid got into Harvard. They won't tell you, my kid came home from Carnegie Mellon last week. What were they going back? We don't know. All right, happens. Another thing about that is we need to find a way for them to keep their faith in college. All right, so this is actually where this is where my role comes into play. That's what I'm trying to train your kids to do, is to develop a faith that's strong enough so when they get to college and they run into these really smart, attractive, lifestyle, non-college kids that they want to be friends with, they don't get pulled away. It should be the other way around. We want our kids to pull those kids into the church, not the other way around. All right, so hopefully by the time your kids leave here, they'll have the ability to witness and explain and defend their faith. And of course, that assumes they have their own faith. All right. And then the other thing is we want to prepare them for changes in life. So they're going to have, like it or not, the story of your kids is they are not going to have one career. It is very, very unlikely your student is going to start work as a lawyer and 40 years later retire as a lawyer. Okay. Most likely what's going to happen is they're going to have 10 to 20 different careers through the next through. I've had 7. And I'm a lot older than these guys, and that's just accelerating. All right. And so one of the things I would encourage you to do is we need to focus on making sure college is about getting an education versus vocational training. So what's the difference? Vocational training is I train you so you can do a job. And education is I train you to look at the world in a way such that as things change, I can change and navigate and do things that's more than just about being trained for that particular job. Okay, there is a difference between being educated and having vocational training. All right, so let's just remember the end goal is not to get them into college, it's to prepare them to be disciples of Christ. So one of the things I recommend then is, if that's really the case, the whole job of college is to help our young people develop an understanding what their calling is. Selecting college becomes an issue of fit, all right? So we should be looking for a place that's going to help them grow and explore. And it should provide opportunities and challenges that they can take advantage of. And now I want to spend a minute on this one. So yes, I'm sure Harvard has gazillions of Nobel Prize winners and Pulitzer Prize people on the staff and so on. How likely is it that your child is going to have access to that person to get trained? Okay, I went to MIT. Most of my classes at the lower level were taught by graduate students. I never saw the Nobel level professors that were supposed to be there, okay, until I got to the senior levels. And then if you were lucky and you were in that particular research area, you might catch a glimpse of them as they walk down the hall in your department, okay? So we got to be realistic about that. One of the things that I would actually, this book here is actually excellent. This actually talks about the concept of being a big fish in a small pond and the advantages of that. And you're actually going to hear case study number 2 talk a little bit about that, all right? And the case that they use in chapter 3 is there's a young lady who was actually, she's actually a brilliant scientist. She loves science and whatever. She got into Brown. And because she was now, instead of being her top student, she was kind of like middle of the pack, she ended up not graduating in a STEM field in science that she loved. She ended up graduating as an economist. All right, nothing wrong with economics, but she had to give up her dream because she didn't fit. And there's a whole litany of stuff in here that's like this. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I recommend this. All right, so when we talk about fit, we want to know, you got to know your kid at this point. This is really, and kids, you need to know yourself. All right, so maturity level. So by the time kids go to college, some kids are more ready than others, let's face it. All right, some kids are just more, they need a little more hand-holding before they go. So you need to consider that, because colleges come at very different levels of hand-holding. I mean, you go to UCLA, forget hand-holding. They're just, they got 150,000 students there, all right? So you need a kid who wants more hand-holding. You need to go to some place where there's a better ratio, all right? Extroversion versus introverts, okay? They're going to navigate colleges differently. The pace. There are some schools that pride themselves on just fire hosing you kids with knowledge. MIT was one of them, okay? Versus your kid may need more time to contemplate and think through and really understand the concepts. And they won't do so well being fire hosed. Learning styles, okay? Theoretical versus practical. This came into play for my son, as you'll see in a minute. Lecture versus project style. There's lots of different ways to communicate information at a college level. Which one works best for your kid? Do you know? Okay. Mentoring. And again, this is access to the faculty thing. Doesn't help if there's a ton of Nobel laureates that you don't have access to. So how much real faculty mentoring are they going to get? And does that necessarily have to be a Nobel laureate? All right. Good, Sean. All right, so here's the advice I have for you students, principally, all right? It's a no-brainer to put a list together of the schools you'd like to go to. Anybody can do that in about 10 seconds. What's really, really, really hard to do is to find a safety school that if you got rejected from every one of your top choices, and the safety schools of which you have, you would still be happy to be there. That is hard. That's really hard, because you're basically saying, if I have to sacrifice for the school I didn't want to go to, I'd still be happy there, all right? So what I would encourage you to look at is a lot of these quote-unquote second-ranked schools, and again, second rank in this country is, I mean, if you actually look at the ranking of the top 100 colleges in this country, they're very, very high, all right? This is not much of a sacrifice. They have specialties or honors programs where you could really take off. You may be able to customize your degree program. So if this college doesn't have exactly what you want, you can change things. Depends on the college. And it's more likely at a lesser ranked university than one of the top ranked. Because the top ranked ones are, quite honestly, here's who we are. You either do the program or you don't do the program. All right. Looking for potential faculty members. Is there somebody doing some really cool work at that school that you'd like to study under? That actually used to be a way people used to pick their colleges originally, is they'd look for the faculty member they wanted to study under, and that's where they would go. I do ask you to consider geographic location, because for you students, where you go to school outside of the university is going to be as much as part of your education as the school itself. Okay? Don't ignore where the school is. And then some schools have really unique industry, academic, or political partnerships. All right, so for example, if you want to go into the State Department, you know, Georgetown University has some amazing alliances, and you need to look at those. And then you also really want to think about this advantage of being in the top 5% of the so-called lesser school, rather than being in the middle 50% of the higher school. All right, I'm an example of the second one. I went to MIT, all right, and at best, I was maybe 50th percentile at best, all right. Wasn't the greatest experience. And I know I didn't get the greatest education, because it actually turned out not to be a really great learning style for me, all right. And so I think I actually would have benefited more like case number 2 here, who actually kind of had the opposite experience, all right. And the other thing is, one other advantage of going to a so-called lesser school is they will throw a lot of times incentive scholarships at you because they want you. Because instead of you being one of the pack being in there, it's like, holy cow, wow, well, this Leah Koo, she's like top 1% of the applicant pool here. What do we need to do to get her? Okay? Or, you know, AJ, wow, this guy here, you know, he could go after some, you know, there's some real unique opportunities there that he could take advantage of that we'll offer you, because he's not the typical student. All right, so you want to look at this. Next one. All right, so here's some red flags. If you're picking a college based on these reasons, you really need to rethink this, okay? If the only thing you can name about the college that you're looking for your kid or yourself is the name and the prestige, and think about that twice, all right? If you think that school is going to be a guarantee to a secure, high-paying career path, I'd really think about that. I can't tell you how many jobless Harvard philosophy majors I know. Okay? Now, they eventually do well, but it's a lot harder to grind. It is no guarantee. Okay? If you're doing it mainly because you want bragging rights, okay, I'd really think about that. It's not really worth the pain. Okay? Again, if you're doing it because this is where all the prestigious faculty are, again, really think about it. Is your kid going to have access to that? I would actually really think about grad school if this is actually an important thing, because graduate school is where you are more likely to rub and work with these people, because you're doing their work. Okay, and then legacy. Okay, this one's a real good deal. If you are legacy, if your kids are legacy, in other words, mom and dad went there, grandma and grandpa went there, therefore you should go there, and that's the reason that's being picked. Really think about that. All right. All right, so here's the real test of a red flag. If you can't point out a specific program, classes, or opportunities that your child or you will be able to access that school, even though it's one of those top-ranked schools, that's a red flag. It means you haven't done your homework. You're just going by name brand. All right, that's really dangerous, because you're going to be living at this name brand for 4 years if you're a student, and you're going to be paying for this name brand if you're the parent, and that's really expensive, to just get a substandard education. All right, next one. All right, so the other thing is I want to talk about reasonable expectations. How many people in this room are Stanford, Harvard, MIT, Yale, or Princeton grads? Raise your hands. I know there's a couple. No, come on. Doesn't have to be undergrad. Okay. Anyways, there's usually a few. So I want you to actually think about this, because as parents, of course, our children are brilliant and they're smarter than we are, and therefore it's obvious that they should be able to replicate what we did. No problem, right? Because they're better than we are. Right. Okay? I want to give you some stats here. So in the 1980s, when I went to school, Barron's Guide used to publish a list of the most selective schools. The definition of a most selective school was here. Look at the acceptance rates. 20 to 25%. MIT was 20 to 40. Cornell, okay, Ivy League school, half. Accepted half the applicants, all right? All right, so I'm about a lot older than most of you guys. Most of you guys are probably in this category more than this area. All right, well, look at this. Look at his acceptance rates. They're still double digit. Okay. All right, think about this. Now, 2015, this is when my son went to school. Halved again. There's no double digits here except for Cornell still on that list, all right? Look at this. What this is telling you, this isn't telling you that MIT had an 8% acceptance rate. It's telling you that MIT had a 92% rejection rate. That's the way to look at the statistic. That means 92 out of 100 of you applying to the school aren't getting in. All right? Now, I want to ask you, what do you think happened between here and here? Is it because we got more kids going to college? No, actually, that's not true. Okay? What happened from here to here was what I call the Common App. Okay, because back here in the bad old days, if you wanted to apply to these schools, you filled out 6 separate applications. They were all really different. Common App did not exist. All right? And so Common App comes along and says, hey, we want to make it easier for the kids to do this because this process is grueling. All right? So they did. They came up with Common App, and boom, by the time you get to 2000, it is easier to apply to all those colleges, which means that as long as you can pay the application fees, instead of spending all your time doing 6 applications, you can now apply to 15 or 20 colleges. It's just money now, all right? And what do you think happened from here to here? All right, now Common App is gone at this point. You know, Common App got implemented here. What's going on here? Again, is it because more kids are applying to college? No. Okay. This is about the time U.S. News and World Report came out with its horrible, horrible rankings. All right? And I want to actually show you one stat that's actually scary. So this stat, I've listed these 2 schools here because this is my son's and this is my daughter's. All right? And back in 2015, my son applied Northeastern and they had a 28% acceptance rate. So this whole thing is my kids should be able to do what I did. My kids did do what I did. I got in here. My kids got in here. They did exactly what I did. All right? It's just that would I get into here today? I guarantee you I wouldn't qualify. All right? So he gets here, and look what happens between just 2015 and 2024. The acceptance rates plummeted from 28% to 5.2%. Now, what happened? Did Northeastern get, increase the number or decrease the number of slots? Did they change the program? What did they do? You know what they did? They gamed the U.S. News and World Ranking system. Because there's 2 ways to make this number go down. I accept fewer students, or I increase the number of ones that are applying so I can reject more. Guess which one Northeastern did? The applicant pool literally shot up by a factor of 4. Okay? Same number of students going into school being accepted. All right? But now they can report acceptance rates that are in the same neighborhood as the Ivy League. The president of this college, the board of trustees loves him because he did exactly what they wanted him to do, which is to turn Northeastern into one of these schools from this type of thing, all right? Now, Oberlin here's an interesting story. I don't have the data going back here, unfortunately, but they have consistently been one of the top liberal arts colleges. First of all, I want to even ask this question. How many have even heard of Oberlin? 2. Right. How many have never heard of this school? Have no idea where it is? Thank you, okay? This school is one of those hidden gems. They're actually considered one of the best small liberal arts colleges in the country, but they're not much bigger than Gunn High School. To give you that idea, all right? And they have consistently had acceptance rates in the 30s, all right? There's a reason for that. We'll talk about this in there. But you see what the numbers game here. So if you are basing your college list on the U.S. News and World Report rankings, you're being gamed. Be very, very careful here. All right. And also ask yourself, if you did go to one of these schools, are you sure you could get into your school again today? I'm pretty sure I couldn't. All right. And I actually have data for this, evidence for this. This is not just conjecture. All right. We're going to look at that in the case. Next one. All right, so I want to now give you case study number 1, who is not here, so I can say all sorts of bad things about him. This is my son, Alex, all right? And I'm actually giving numbers. My kids gave me permission to do this because I think you guys need to have an expectation of what it's going to actually take and what's reasonable to expect, all right? So my son, Gunn High School, class of 2015, had a 3.878 GPA. You know what that means? He got 2 Bs. You know, at Gunn High School, you get 1 B, you're automatically in the 60th percentile because the other 40% of the class has straight A's. Isn't that insane? Okay, so he got 2 Bs. He actually blames me because I encouraged him to take classes that weren't easy A's. Oh, that happens, right, students? You don't do that to boost your GPA, right? Take the easier class, you can boost that. He had 7 APs. All right, so he had a pretty respectable program. And back then they had the 2400 scale SAT. So there was a verbal math and a composition thing, which they finally dropped. And so he had a 2110 out of 2400, which was okay. It was good, but it wasn't great. All right. Extracurriculars, right? We spent a lot of time sending our kids to extracurriculars. My son was a California All-State jazz trumpet player. He was the first kid in 15 years to go to California All-State Jazz from Gunn. Okay? He's still that kid that they refer to as, oh, that kid. I mean, I actually had this conversation with somebody back then.
The solo person.
Yeah. Activities. He's a Eagle Scout, 3rd degree black belt in Taekwondo. Got accepted to Stanford Pre-Collegiate Summer Program, which is one of these enrichment programs they have at Stanford. So, seem to be doing all those type of things. What kind of career goal? What kind of career goals did he have as a senior? Very, very vague. He had no clue. He really was clueless about where he wanted to go to college. All right, but I also knew his mother and I also knew he was a practical learner. Okay, he wasn't an academic. He only cared about knowledge if he could figure out what to do with it. It had to be useful, all right? But he is also very musical, so music was really important in his life. So, of course, being clueless, what were his dream schools? Stanford, MIT, CMU. He actually thought MIT was a safety school because I was legacy. Okay? Rejected, boom, flat off. His safety schools, Northeastern, Case, and there were a couple of others, all right? The only reason Northeastern got on his list is because he discovered that it was a Common App school. He didn't have to write any additional applications. He just had to check another box and pay another fee. So, okay, he would do it because Dad kept pushing. The reason I kept pushing him is when I was back at MIT, even back then, Northeastern University had a reputation for being a very practical school with very good internship program, a really good co-op program. I used to envy that because the kids there actually had money. Because they go work for 6 months and they come back and they actually had money. All right? And so it's like, Alex, you might like this program because you like stuff that's kind of hands-on, that you can do it and you can apply the knowledge, and you go back in, you go into school and out of industry and back in and so forth. It might work for you. So he agreed to do that, and lo and behold, he got in. And because back then, Northeastern was starting to play this game of trying to boost their numbers, and one of them is average SAT score for the student body, and his scores were pretty high. He was definitely in the top 5 to 10% of the applicant pool there. They threw money at him. Thank God for the mayor. It was great. I mean, they paid for half his school. I didn't have to touch it. All right? And even though they're not known for music, all right, he got great faculty. So they had, this music department is so small, it's literally 4 teachers and 4 practice rooms on one floor in one building.
Half a floor.
Right? But half a floor, right. But because he was so good, he immediately attracted the attention of all the faculty. He got great mentors. He got to perform in clubs, and he got sent to Spain. I mean, Tufts University, not Northeastern, paid for him to play in Spain as a ringer because they didn't have enough jazz trumpet players because of the faculty. That's the kind of thing that happens when you're the big fish in the small pond. Think about it. All right. And he also did participate in their co-op program, and he got to work at some really cool places, including Bose. In fact, our house is full of Bose sound equipment from a discount. Okay, and NASA JPL, where he got to work for the Mars rover program. Now that sounds really cool until you find out what he did was he actually was gluing rocks to plates for testing of the rover. All right, but that's his thing. And then, so after he graduated in 2020 in the pandemic. All right, so he went to work down in San Luis Obispo for a semiconductor equipment company called Integris. Found out he hated being a mechanical engineer. He just finished a 4-year degree in mechanical engineering, all right, and he hated it. All right, hey guys, I got news for you. This may happen to you. You may get through your program and you decide you don't like it, and you know what? He decided, okay, I don't like it, I'm going to change careers. And I said, that's great. Your nickel, not my nickel. And he said, no problem, Dad. I save money. He went back to Northeastern, just finished his master's in computer science in December, and now he's working in New York City as a software engineer. All right. Now, along the way, something interesting happened. He was never wild about being a mechanical engineer, and he was sort of lukewarm about being a software engineer. And my parent, we never pushed him to be a software engineer, because I know a lot of parents do that. It's like, be a software engineer. This is like being the new lawyer. It's a nice security. In my generation, it was being a lawyer, right? Be a lawyer, job security. That's the way to go, right? Now it's like, be a software engineer, job security. That's the way to go. We never pushed him that way. He decided to do that, and along the way, he actually discovered, hey, guess what? He liked it. Okay, so this is the first time in his career, the way kids form, their likes and dislikes. It's like, I try it, I don't like that. 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 Hey, wait a minute, that one's kind of cool. Ooh, this was like the first time I actually heard a positive out of my son saying, hey, this is kind of cool, I like this. As opposed to, I don't like it, I don't like it, I don't like it, I don't like it. All right. Now, does he love being a software engineer? The jury's still out. All right, he's still 27. He's not even 30 yet. All right. Do I expect him to change careers and so forth in the future? Probably. Is it okay? Yeah, it's okay. All right. That's case study number one. All right. Now, in this particular case, the one area that's missing here is my son was not Christian. All right. So as a parent, this is what is my biggest thing. Now, I have hopes that recently he's changed that. And the reason I say hopes is he's not being real clear about it to me either, but that's kind of my greatest hope. All right. So as Christian parents, remember, what is it that you really want for your kid? All right. I will argue that making a decision for Christ is the single most important decision they will make in their lives, because that's the one that has eternal consequences. All this other stuff is secondary. All right. Case number 2 is sitting right here. And I'm going to give you some of the stats, because I know she's too embarrassed to do it, and then I'll let her talk. All right, so this is Mina, the younger one, okay? Gun High School class of 2020. So remember, can you flip back to that last slide for a second? So some of you parents might be sitting here, because I've actually heard this, like, oh, well, I know why your kid didn't get into Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford. His GPA wasn't that great, neither were his SAT scores. He didn't have enough APs. Okay, so let's turn to the next one. Case study number 2. Mina's a straight A student. She had a 4+ GPA. In fact, have you ever had an?
Did you? 4.34.
Did you ever get a B?
Nope.
Have you ever gotten a B yet?
I got a B in my graduate school physical organic chemistry course.
This is her first B is in grad school. Okay, ever. All right. So that argument's out the window. Okay, so it's not a GPA problem here. SAT score, yeah, maybe it could be better. It's 15 out of 16. All right, they're back to the 2-point scale now. All right. She had an extra AP over her brother. All right, so we got that through there. She, like her brother, is also a California All-State person, but she's a violinist in this particular case. She spent years at the Golden State Youth Orchestra in the first violin section, not as a concertist or anything like that, but still in that first section, and she is a National Merit Scholar. All right, so you would think, oh, this one's a shoo-in for HIPSM, right? Yeah. No. All right. Now, the one thing we did know about Mina is that because she was more communicative than her mom than my son was about what he liked and stuff. And so Mina's always been kind of a creative type, more of an associative thinker, but she also still had very vague career goals because there were so many things she liked, she couldn't choose, right? And so we did know it early on that she needed a place that she could really kind of explore and do some things that were not all major related. So of course her dream school list, there you go. All right, I think Brown was your top, right, at that point.
Could be, because they had an open curriculum.
Yeah, and then MIT, even to Berkeley, and of course she got rejected. All right, you can ask her how she felt about that. I can tell you it was not a happy time. All right, parents be prepared for a happy time. All right, her safeties, Oberlin, Case Western, and a number of UCs. All right, and when she got into Oberlin, were you thrilled to get into Oberlin?
I think it was more like, oh, okay.
I can tell you, I don't think she was really thrilled to get in there. All right, So, see, she went to Oberlin, and one of the reasons this got onto her safety list is because she knew she had some interest in chemistry, and she, again, had a really strong interest in music, to the point where I think you may have even been considering like a conservatory, type thing. And so she ended up doing a double major in chemistry and musical studies. Now, I want to point out something about small schools. This major here didn't even exist until she came. That was the first year they offered this major. All right, we're going to talk about God's providence in a little while, all right? And of course, because her scores and stuff are off the chart for Oberlin's student body, they threw a ton of money at her too, all right? Great for me as a dad. All right. Exploration. I mean, she can tell you what kind of things, but she really explored, in addition to being a chemistry and music major, she took Latin, she did bookbinding, she did Korean history. She was able to actually, through Oberlin, go to Yonsei University and spend a semester there, studying at Yonsei, all right, which was also made me really happy. All right, she, even though she wasn't part of the conservatory, she had access to a lot of conservatory resources, because every time she would ask the administration for something different, the answer was always yes. You try that at Berkeley. Hi, I'd like to be able, no. Sorry, you're one of 120,000 students here, all right? And so, and she also got access to a lot of disproportionate opportunities. And so she was elected to Phi Beta Kappa in her junior year, which is a little bit unusual. She got to do a lot of undergraduate research, and then she was actually elected to Sigma Psi, which is a scientific research honor society in her senior year. All right, all because of the fact that it was the big fish in the small pond. All right, and then as a result of those mentorships, she got great recommendations. Personal recommendations. Think about this. So at some point, if you guys want to go to grad school, you're going to need to get faculty recommendations. Are you going to go to that faculty member that doesn't even know your name? Or are you going to have to go to somebody who can really write a recommendation? She got recommendations from, core faculty members there because she had those opportunities. And so where did she end up? At UC Berkeley, who had rejected her before. There's always grad school. If you're really, really hung up on the name thing, guys, there's always grad school. All right? But more important for me as a dad, so when Mina went to Oberlin, she was not Christian. Okay, in fact, I was kind of dreading the fact, the one thing I didn't like about Oberlin is Oberlin, even though it had been founded by Presbyterian ministers in the late 1800s, was about as liberal and woke a school as you will ever find.
It's queer normative there.
Oh my gosh.
It's actually unusual to be straight there.
Yeah. And the fact that she landed with a set of Christian friends in this incredibly liberal place is only the grace of God. All right, and she can tell you a little bit more about that. All right. So, anyways, so at this point, I'm going to kind of let you talk a bit about your path, and then people, if you want to have questions, there she is.
All right. What do you want me to start with?
Why don't you talk a little bit about how you felt? Talk about how. So when you got to Oberlin, what happened? In other words, talk about the doors opening and closing, and how you ran into your friends and stuff, and things like that.
Okay, so I think we'd have to back up a little bit. So when I was accepted to colleges, I had a handful of offers from. I was accepted to UC Irvine and UC Davis, and I was also accepted to Oberlin with half scholarship and Case Western with half scholarship. In total, the four schools the offers ended up being within $100 of each other. Because as you know, state tuition is around $35,000, and private out-of-state tuition is more like $75 to $80K. And these are numbers from 4 years ago, so they might be a little bit more now, I'm not sure. But it was a little unusual to me that all of the offers ended up within $100 of each other, because it meant that wherever I wanted to choose to go, it wasn't going to be about the money, and it wouldn't be about burdening my parents financially and being like, I really want to go to this school, but it's $80K and you guys are going to have to pay for it. And so between Case Western and Oberlin then, because I was interested in going out of state, they both had a dual music program with a STEM program, because Case Western is partnered with the Cleveland Institute of Music. And at Case is a very strong engineering program, and I was potentially interested in materials engineering. So I knew that if I went to Case, I would be studying more engineering and less music because I would have to pay for lessons. At Oberlin, I would not have to pay for lessons. I could use my class credits for them, and I would not be able to study material science, but I could study chemistry. And so ultimately I decided I wanted to do a little bit more music, so I ended up going to Oberlin for that. I ended up making friends with a lot of conservatory musicians while I was there, and what happened in my first year was that for some reason or another, all of my friends actually were also Christian, and we weren't, it wasn't like we were looking for a fellowship. We just ended up getting pulled together. Like my cellist friend was Catholic. My two piano friends were Protestant, and we don't really know how to explain that other than just that God probably just stuck us together because it's not really good to be alone in that environment. What else about early times?
Again, I mean, so what did you, if you were advising somebody here, let's do the pros and cons of like the smaller school and exploring, what would you give them? What advice would you give them?
Pros and cons of a smaller school. Class sizes are a lot smaller, and they are taught directly by professors, which is, and I say this as a PhD student who has taught classes now at Berkeley, that the grad students really maybe don't know what they're doing. I'm not sure you necessarily want to trust your organic chemistry class that you need to take as a pre-med to a grad student that just got there a semester ago, if you have the choice to have it taught by a professor who's been there for 10 years and really knows what they're talking about. And I definitely benefited from the structure and the knowledge that my professors had, and also their willingness to meet with students during office hours, take extra time to explain concepts that were confusing to people, and also just take things at a slightly slower pace than what you might expect when you're just trying to get through content. And because they also, and I think I kind of found this more valuable being a TA, or when I became a TA, but if you're the professor of a course, you can actually adjust your content to your students. When you're a TA, you can't do that. It's not your content, it's not your material, you just have to get through it. And you can't make changes if you see that some people are getting confused, because it's not your course. So there's a lot more flexibility in a small liberal arts environment.
And the other thing, you want to talk a little about is the college admissions process for you, and what your friends kind of went through, and what you saw were kind of good things and bad things. Something that these guys can maybe warn off.
So we all kind of went into the college admissions process with a bit of a cynical attitude, because we'd seen so many people before us, and Gunn, of course, is not a great place for mental health. So we all had, I don't know, the blackest gallows humor ever, talking about stuff and talking about college. And of course we had all of our like Asian jokes about getting into the right schools or the wrong schools or ruining our lives. And I think that what's important for people to, and maybe it's changed in the past 5 years, but when I was in high school, there were maybe 10% of kids that were really being pushed by their parents to, go to Harvard and Yale and actually get in, and were actually afraid of their parents, or had parents kind of holding conditional love above them, telling them that if they didn't perform well, then they wouldn't be treated well at home. Or kind of not really like physically not treated well, but more just, I'm disappointed in you. I don't think you did the right thing, and kind of holding approval over their kids. But then there were the other 90% of us that didn't have that maybe at home, but saw those other kids. And the thing is, it is actually attractive to want to try and get into one of those schools for yourself, because you want to show to people that you can get in. And so I knew many people that applied to all of the Ivies not because they wanted to go to any of them, but just because they wanted to prove that they could get in. And I almost did that, I'm gonna say. The only reason I didn't do that was because I saw that there were so many more applications I was gonna have to write, and I thought about it and I went, even if I got in, I would not want to go to any of these schools, so I'm not going to apply. So really the only Ivies that I actually applied to were basically just those ones. Like, I didn't apply to Cornell or Columbia or Dartmouth or any of the other places. And yeah, so what I saw when I was applying was that there were a couple kids that were being pushed. There were a couple kids, or most of the rest of the kids weren't being pushed, but had kind of absorbed the mindset of wanting to also compete, to maybe for themselves or maybe to prove to other people. And also just that college was a little bit of a game. It was a little bit of a game in that sense, because people weren't really thinking so much about where they would want actually like living at the school. It was more like I know I'd love to be there because everything about it I've heard is great, but not really thinking too much about it. And yeah, there's something else I was going to say, but I'm just kind of slipping my mind.
I have a question. So I'm not familiar with this U.S. Education system, like a high school. I know there are some good schools of a second tier, like a smaller school, but how are you able to locate the information? Because I know those
The
searching
search
for
is
the
all going to be
information, it can
students,
be
so.
a student or parents. Also, I know there is a counselor at the school, like a private counselor or the school counselor. So I'd like to know your experience, how you end up finding those schools who are not
On the ranking.
I think the reason why we end up like having available options of the top school, they are very well known school like to the public, but I'm very interested in locating those information, like the smaller schools, like providing a good quality of education. But I don't know how you end up finding that information.
Yeah, do you remember what the guide was that we had? So there are other college guides out there that are not just the U.S. rankings and not just Barron's.
Yeah, so there's,
Do you remember which one that
there's
is?
a couple ways to do it. So if you are fortunate enough to be in a school that has a college guidance counselor, okay, like Gunn has several, you won't get a lot of meetings because they're so busy. But I know the one at Gunn is particularly, Linda Kirsch used to be the counselor. She was actually
Oh,
really
yeah.
good. And what they actually have really good information, but what they find is a lot of, and I hate to stereotype, a lot of Asian parents particularly don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear, so they'll take their, they have the student transcripts, and they kind of have an idea what would be a good fit for their kids. But when the fit that comes out of their mouth is not Harvard, the parents shut down and they don't listen, all right? And then,
Oh my God, it's not. It's Stanford.
so first thing is, so those people are actually really good at figuring out, if they know that you're listening, being able to point out alternative schools that might be a really good fit for your kid. But you gotta listen, because obviously if they sense that you're not, that's gonna be, and then like Mina said, there are a number of college guides out there that you can purchase that talk about, they talk in more narrative style about what the culture is and the life of our different schools that you can also look at. And then of course you should talk to other parents, and I would try to encourage you to talk to, and if you wanna get a wider perspective, don't go after other Asian American parents, go after parents that are, Jewish or, Caucasian or whatever, that have different experiences, because they'll have a different perspective on these things that you might have, all right?
I think that was also something that was interesting about being at Oberlin, just that because there weren't a lot of because I had more white friends when I was over there, I could actually hear about what it was like for them growing up. And also because I was in the conservatory sphere, I knew kids who had parents who were musicians that thought, what I want to do when I grow up is be a musician. And that was something that their parents supported.
Yeah. The other thing is there are, of course, private counselors that work here. We actually did use one for Mina. We did not use one for my son because he didn't want anything to do with it. But Mina said she wanted some help kind of
Organizing.
We did hire a counselor. And the advice I would give there is look for a counselor that focuses on fit, not on guaranteeing your kid will get, that they'll guarantee that they'll get your kid into a particular university. There are, I hate to say it, there are counselors that'll sit there and go, we know how to get consistent, da-da-da, and, we'll maximize your chance of getting your kid into this thing. Stay away from those people.
Yeah, the very first thing that our college counselor recommended or said in our introductory meeting was, I do not promise to get you into a school that you name. I promise to get you into a school that would be a good fit for you. It may not be the one that you're expecting.
And I'm perfectly happy to share the name of,
Yeah,
counselors and
she's
stuff that
great.
we have, because she's still, out there. But other parents have the same experience. So you can get it, but you just have to be prepared to listen. Okay, is really the message on that.
So first meeting usually takes place junior year or sophomore?
Normally junior year.
Yeah.
Either junior year or senior year.
Yeah, you'll have, at least at Gunn, they would meet with everybody by the time they were done through the first semester senior year. Now, I don't know how other schools do it, okay? Every school has its own. Some schools have much stronger departments with college counselors, so that's something you can look at. But, it's, the other piece of advice I would just give you on this is and this is more for you, you students have to have some idea of what you like. All right, that's not, so this is actually one of the biggest handicaps I had with my son, not so much with Mina, but with Alex. He had no clue. And it's very hard to help somebody when they have no clue, all right? Guys, this is your future, all right? And so you need to be thinking about some of those things. What do you like? What do you don't like? And you can be honest about it. And so parents, this is why I wanted both in the room. You, at the end of this time when you guys are done talking, you should both have some idea of what your child's best learning style is, what their interest is, what they really want. I mean, it's if your kid really doesn't want to be a lawyer, stop pushing them to be a lawyer. Okay, your kid, you need to be open to the fact may not want to be a doctor. Your kid may want to. And in this card, I hesitate to say this. You might even need to be open to the fact that your child may not even want to go to college. Or they may even want to take a year off before going to college. That may not be such a bad thing. I know that's like total heresy.
Some people are really burnt out. It's a year. I knew several friends that took a year, or even took a year within college to just take some time to process.
I think you already touched upon the part that I actually wanted to ask. So for the fit, the first step is like knowing the kid, knowing themselves, right? What are the things that you like advise on, like things to do to know them better?
Well, I mean, so the activities that a lot of you are putting your kids into for college, they're not bad things. Youth orchestras and the art schools and things. But they're bad things if you're using them as a way of just boosting their, resume. Okay. What the good use of those types of things is when you're finding out if they have an interest in that, or do they have a talent in that. And this is where you have to kind of be very. So this my late wife was better at this, being a professional musician. So my kids both had musical interests, and they actually seriously both toyed with being professional musicians. It wasn't me that talked them down. It was my wife that sat there and said, you need to really think about what this means because I am a professional musician and I know what it's going to take. And she would literally tell me that, it's like, if you don't start working harder in this area, you're not going to be good enough. Now, that is not a message, that's not an encouraging message a parent wants to send to their kid, right?
She also told us if you cannot imagine yourself doing anything else,
Yeah.
and you can't live without it, that's the only reason you should go into it. If you can even do anything else with your life, if you can do anything else with your life, go do that instead. Music is too hard.
Yeah. Now, I was actually the one that was a little bit more encouraging about keeping them open to the musical side because but I hadn't lived through it either, so it's kind of like the, whatever. So knowing other people is hard. I mean, that's actually why we really need to be turning to God in prayer, especially during this time. Every time you have a conflict with your kid or about goals or what they want or whatever, you guys should be going to prayer. All right, you really should be going to prayer because the ultimate goal is to try to figure out what God's calling is for your, son or daughter. All right, and that calling is not necessarily going to be just one thing. They may do many different things. God may take them in many, many different paths. Right, and that's what you should be looking for. It's like, what do you want me to do now? I mean, now I can look back and say the reason she ended up at Oberlin is, first of all, to come to Christ, and then second of all, just to do the exploration she needed to do these kinds of things, right? It's hard to see that in advance. So parents, I would say some degree of humility is probably wise at this point. Students, pay attention to what you like. Okay, this is the time to really understand what it is you like. What do you like to do? What do you not like?
Dad, on that note, I might say it might, if you're like me at all, you might find that hard to do in high school because in high school I trained myself to basically like any subject that I was studying so that I could do well in it.
Except history.
And so, except for history, I hated history, so. But because of that, it was actually very difficult for me to tell what I liked and what I disliked doing because it was like, well, all of it's interesting, I guess, and I can make myself like everything, and I'm good at everything, and yes, anyway. But, I didn't say that, but, yeah. But it was, but also because I was doing so many extracurriculars at the same time, I didn't have any time to think. I was always doing things. So because of that, and because you have so many subjects that you need to do well in high school, I found that there wasn't really any time for me to think about what I liked and what I didn't like. It was more like, you don't have a choice whether you like it or don't like it, you just have to do it. And so that presented some problems for me when I had to write my college essays, and I realized that I didn't really know who I was as a person. So I think if I had to go back, I might say that it would almost be wiser to give yourself more breathing room if there are things that maybe you choose not to take an AP in something that you don't actually like, or maybe you do choose to drop one of the 3 orchestras that you're in so that you have a little bit more space to go on random walks in the park or something. Just give yourself more space.
So as a common thing, just a big career goal is kind of, you have to accept it until like high school. So my point is, I think it's not difficult to guess like Mina, Alex were really good students and good kids, but they both also has a very vague career
Very
goal.
vague.
Yes.
So, but as like many other people students think about that, why we have concrete goal, right?
Right.
But even I ask my Oliver, so what do you like it? But they say no, I don't know. But most people like that can happen, even like the really good students. So should we accept it in that big career goal until what they aware that themselves? I'm very confused that part.
Yeah, I don't think you have a choice because you can't make somebody have a goal. Okay. Yeah, I
People
think
only grow up as fast as they grow up,
Right.
and I think having exposure as a kid is very important because then you have a higher chance of understanding what you like. But for some people, they won't understand what they actually like to do until they come across higher level classes in college and realize, oh, I actually don't like doing that.
Yeah, so, and actually Mina brings up a really good point. So the high school curriculum is pretty well set, okay? I mean, basically.
Very general, all the subjects all the time.
Yeah, and I remember her complaining about, I'm not sure I want to do science because the fact is like these classes are really boring. And I kept telling her, wait till you get to college, they'll get better, all right? But that's why college is actually, in my mind, is a very important period to allow them to explore because now they're past the basics, right? The problem is when you're learning the basics are the same for everybody. You're really not going to get a chance to to know if you like something, because you're still working through the basics. And now you get to college, and now you have this potential smorgasbord of things that you can try. I would actually encourage you, let your kids try, all right? So I know a lot of Asian parents that it's basically, I'm paying for college, I'm paying for you to become a lawyer. No, you cannot take that class over there in Latin, because there's nothing to do with your major. I think that's a mistake, all right?
Yeah, I have a comment on that aspect. In my mental health rotation, a lot of the kids I saw are youth, not youth, undergraduate students that were there that were hospitalized for suicide was because half of them were because, first of all, they never experienced failure. And the second aspect, and they didn't know how to maneuver that. And the second aspect was what Pastor Ed just said was, their dream wasn't their dream, it was their parents' dream. And then when they can't live up to their parents' dream, it's like the floor underneath them gave out. And they didn't know what to do. To the points where I was having the parents and the kid in the same room, and the parents were crying saying, if that was the case, let go. But then it was so ingrained into the kid's head, it took so long for the kid to finally let go. And that's just part of the thing, which is why Pastor Ed and Pastor June and Pastor Joseph also push a lot on where our foundation should be at.
The thing also is that we're listening, so even if we don't have the 10% of parents that are pushing, we are hearing our friends make jokes, we're talking to our friends, and we are weighing in our own minds whether or not the only way is actually going to Harvard or Princeton, or whether or not it is actually, and so we might choose for ourselves to become an ambitious person, to apply for all the schools and to have a secure dream of being a software engineer because it sounds like it's the most sensible thing for us to do, just from what everybody around us is saying.
Yeah, I remember one of the kids saying, like, I just kept telling him, he's like, I have to be a doctor, I have to be a doctor. I'm like, dude, your grades aren't gonna make you a doctor, right? You're not gonna
Right,
get
so
there.
there's that reality check, right?
I'm like, what is the second choice? He says, I don't have a second choice. And that's why he was there. Yeah.
Let me add in two things, because I was raised there. I came here when I was 10 years old. 제가 5학년 때 와가지고 여기서 학교를 가고 이제 했는데. So I want to say two things. Don't pick a school, pick a major. Korean parents try to go, okay, I want to get into Harvard. What major does he have to do? He has to do underwater basketball to go to Harvard. Okay, so he's going to do that for the rest of his life. You know, you can't do that. How many, like he said, how many philosophy major from Harvard is unemployed? You know, kind of the thing. You have to pick a major, you know, that your son could do or daughter could do. And second thing is, it has to be realistic. If you want to go med school, what you have to understand is this kids, after 4 years of stress, goes to college and they're going to be under even more stress. Because if they can't get their grade, they can't go to medical school, and their life is nothing. They can't even be an assistant lab, you know, 4 years of pre-med. When I went to college, one of my roommates was a senior pre-med. He had 3.9 GPA, and he couldn't get into a med school he wanted. So this man who studied just all 4 years, just studied, all of a sudden start drinking and smoking and just partying because it's like, okay, I can't get into the college I want. My life is finished, basically. Unless your kid is really into studying and he's ready for that 4 years, another 4 years of even harder stress, you have to think, do I really want him to be a pre-med, you know, and be a doctor, you know? I majored in civil engineering. And the reason why I majored in civil engineering is, one, we don't need to go to med school. I graduate 4 years and I get a job. That's why I said, Jimmy picked a really good major as an engineer. You finish and you go out get a job. I didn't do software engineering because I hated being indoors just in front of a screen doing this all day long. Civil engineering, I get to just go outside and I'm outside in the construction field. That's why I picked my major, and that's what I'm doing. Second thing I wanted to say is, you know, previous time I was a deputy director for San Francisco contracting. So I hire people. So I interview people, and I interview kids from Stanford, kids from Berkeley, kids from San Jose State, kids from Hayward State. I don't pick somebody from their school. I pick somebody who has a nice personality, who I could work with. There's a guy who came as a Stanford graduate. He sat there, and he's rejected because his attitude was, "Hey, I'm from Stanford. Okay, get out." Because this is company. You need to work together. 그러니까 사람이 먼저 돼야 돼요. You want your kids to be happy. You want them to have a life. You want them to go into after college. You want them to be a kind of people that people like, that people want to work with. Because when you get in, if you're engineering, software engineering, but you have no personality. I hire you because you're smart, you have good GPA. Okay, I want you to go to that. 저 책상 가서 그냥 찌그러져 있어. You just do programming all day long. Okay, I'm not gonna bother you. You don't bother me. You just program. And that's it. You have a good personality. These kids, I don't care if you were from San Jose State. These guys are making directorship way before these guys. Because they know how to talk to people. They know how to get along and then work together. So one thing when I'm doing Daniel is I want him to be happy. I don't want him to just grudge through high school. Oh, man, I just want to get to college. If he's raised that way, I guarantee you, when he goes to college, he's not going to make it. And so these are the things I want you to think about as your parent. You don't want to have a kid that went to a good school and failed their life. You want to raise a kid that's going to have a happy, successful life forever. Okay? All right.
So real quickly, I second that. We just fired a doctor because he couldn't fit with the group. he graduated from Stanford Orthopedics residency, and we cut him off because he was like it was his way or no way, and we said if that's the case.
And the guy I hired was from San Jose State. The guy from Berkeley and Stanford, he couldn't make it. So.
In the interest of time, let me go ahead and wrap up, and then I'm happy to take questions, chat, answer more questions, and things like that. But basically, I know some people have to leave. So one thing I just want to kind of leave you guys with here is, first of all, college is not the end goal. All right, it's just part of that journey that Pastor June is referring to. I highly recommend, because of where your youth are. It's very likely at this point in their life they're not going to know what they're going to do. All right, and I'm happy to tell you later on about my twists and turns in life, but I just don't want to do it here right now. So college should be a time of exploration, all right, and really a purpose. Just keep in mind it's about finding God's calling. That's really the whole point, all right. So if you keep that in mind, I think you make the right decision. And then make that a focus on fit, and this should also include on how it's going to nurture your faith, all right. So I was actually really impressed with one of my youth, who will go nameless. Part of the reason he picked the college that he's going to is because they have a strong Christian community. And it's like, wow, that is so smart.
Yep.
That is smart. Okay, so think about that. So just keep that in mind. Make sure your faith doesn't rest in college. It should be resting in God. Again, we're done with the formal part. I am happy to take questions.
Happy to take questions.
Stop recording.
Huh?
Stop recording.
Oh, yes.